Okay, thank you so much. But first of all, we have to check if Peter Rawitscher is also here with us. Can you open your microphone? Because, yeah, great. Hello, can you say something?
Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon. We're very happy to participate here in the conference, and I guess Laura will start the presentation.
Yes, that's right. So you could also hear Peter Rawitscher, right? Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, great. Great. Thank you so much for your patience. So thank you very much for the invitation. It is a great honor for us to be here with you. Before we begin, I would like to introduce ourselves. Here with us is Peter Rawitscher, anthropologist and working at the organization Gonavindua Tairona of the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta in Colombia. And unfortunately, Arigoses Conchacala Tsarawata, governor of the Kagaba people of the organization Gonavindua Tairona, cannot be here with us, but will be part in the presentation via video. My name is Laura Felicitas Sabel. I'm based in Zurich, and I'm a research assistant at the DFG Research Training Group Cultures of Critique at the Leuphana University of Lüneburg, where I'm currently doing a PhD. Sorry, maybe I'm gonna, yes, sorry. Where I'm currently doing a PhD with Professor Susanne Leb and Professor Benedikt Savoy of the Technical University of Berlin. My project mainly researches and supports the process of recovery of the Tairona's descendants' cultural heritage that I'm very happy about representing together today for the first time. You can also read a short article of our contribution and the materials for discussion by ICOFOM. Today, we will discuss how the ancestral knowledge of the Sierra Nevada's indigenous people could potentially change the current perspective on cultural heritage, enable transformation within museums, and foster collective action towards the planet's protection and care. I now will give the floor to Peter Rawitscher and Arigoses Conchacala, who will give you an insight on the Kagabas' relationship with Mother Earth, as well as on the meaning they give to their cultural heritage and the consequences of its translocation. So next, Arigoses Conchacala Tarawata will talk about the Línea Negra and the ancestral territory in a video.
El territorio ancestral llega en la línea negra, eso es la palabra dicho en español, pero hasta Sechilla. La palabra Sechilla es estar en la paz, fe. O sea, Sechilla es como vivir de la paz. Todo el territorio ancestral está dicho en la paz, de la diversidad.
Okay. So then we would go on, and Peter, this would be your turn. Could you please tell us something about the law of origin and about how the spiritual work of the Mamos maintain the equilibrium and how the ancestral knowledge system is transmitted from generation to generation?
Well, good afternoon. I guess I'd like to start by thinking about the reference that Caroline made in her last in her presentation about the Guatemalan ball playing to the Devil's Rocks. And in the Sierra Nevada, these are called sacred sites. And there's the entire Sierra Nevada for the indigenous people is filled with lots of different kinds of sacred sites. So anthropologists used to call them the Devil's Rocks back in the 1900s. They would also use the same terminology. But in fact, for the indigenous people, they are sacred sites, and they have spiritual parents in the sacred sites. The spiritual parents you can say, are embedded in territory. And so there's like thousands of spiritual sites in the mountain. That the Sierra Nevada is a big mountain. It goes from 5,000 meters down to the ocean, into the ocean. So the map that Arrego Says just showed of the black line of the ancestral territory is actually this big mountain that goes down into the sea. So there's parts of the mountain that are under the sea as well. And so for the indigenous people, for everyone who works there, there's a spiritual connection. And the spiritual connection is to the origin of things. So these sacred sites, these devil's rocks, as maybe the Europeans would say a few hundred years ago, a couple hundred years ago, were the connections to the origin of certain principles of life. So you would have the origin of water, the origin of certain kinds of birds, of forests, of trees, animals. And so the idea is that you have a spiritual end of things and also a material end of things, and everything is in a relationship, a kind of reciprocity. And so by giving back spirit to this relationship, there's a response on a material side as well, and things come to life. So the indigenous people heal their use of nature through these sacred sites by being in permanent contact with the spirit. And this brings us to the main topic of our presentation, which are the sacred, or the objects that are part of these sites. So many of the objects that are in museums, called Tairona objects, were elements that were brought out of territory, but they form part of the same relationship with the spirit. And so these objects connect the indigenous people to the land and to the spirit, and have a very important role in keeping nature together in the Sierra Nevada. And so that's sort of to set a little bit of the background for our intervention today. I guess I'll leave it at that for the moment, if that's okay, Laura.
Mhm. Okay. Thank you very much. Maybe then we could go on to another quite important topic we wanted to talk about. If you want to continue saying something about that, Peter?
Oh, the damage. Okay. Well, so these objects that we're talking about are what they call pre-Columbian objects. But for the indigenous people, they're not really pre-Columbian objects. These are objects that they've been using for hundreds of years, for thousands of years, to have a relationship with territory, to have a relationship with these, I guess you would call it, forms of communication with the spirit, with the spirit of nature, forms of communication with her, to keep nature going, so that we can use different elements of nature and give back to it so it'll get stronger. So these objects, for instance, are gold objects, which I think Laura will be showing to us in a minute, like that you normally see in museums, of people dancing, of patterns. There's little rocks in there that we call shimana, meaning seeds, that also connect people to these origins of nature. And well, other objects as well, like ceramics. If the ceramics that you see are actually like these vases are containers that have also a spiritual value according to each kind of thing that's drawn on the ceramic. So the indigenous people here talk about affectations, about damage to this relationship, this connection with nature itself. that we are part of as people. We're part of that. And so we have the damage that happens to this relationship, and the damage can take place on the level of damage to territory. So you can have mega projects, roads, that kind of thing that will destroy these sacred sites. The sacred sites can be hills, the mountains themselves. I guess you in Spanish you say cerros tutelares. The mountains are also a spiritual essence and territory, as are the lakes, as are the rivers, the springs, the trees. And so when these things are bulldozed over or destroyed to make some kind of a building, well, that's a damage of our relationship to these principles of nature. And in the same way, these objects that we have now in museums in Europe and in the United States and in Latin America itself, in Colombia, they have been extracted from territory. That is a kind of damage to the relationship that we maintain with territory and with the principles that give it life. So taking these objects away has been a form of, say, European colonialism, and that whole system of taking away objects and of decontextualizing them from their use, sort of like kind of like saying Devil's Rock or a sacred site. It's taking away the whole significance of the way the indigenous people relate to the environment, to the el entorno. And so that is a kind of damage that's happening. So the reason that one of the reasons that we are giving this conference today is to try to recontextualize the relationship with museums and understand that this relationship, in fact, is something that is not contributing to present-day indigenous people, at least in the Sierra Nevada, to being able to maintain this relationship that keeps up their culture or keeps up their practices, and it takes away from it. So the idea here is that we can start to give back, start to return some of these objects, or hopefully a lot of them, in recognition of healing the processes of damage that have been happening for the last few centuries as people have been misrecognizing these objects and taking them away. So I think I'll leave it at that for a moment and let Laura continue with the presentation.
Thank you very much. Let us now turn to the cultural heritage importance and its translocations consequences. And we want to listen again to Arigoses Conchacala Zaravata, who will talk about the importance of sacred sites, of sacred objects in the video.
Sus preguntas, te voy a decir integral. Yo creo que cuando hablamos de la devolución de los objetos que están en los museos, creo que la devolución se requiere del territorio ancestral, que ese es el como viene la herencia de ese territorio ancestral. Pues ese elemento es lo que le da fuerza a los territorios. Por eso mismo creo que hemos dicho la devolución. Algún día quisiéramos devolución de todo, de lo que ha ido de la herencia de los taironas.
And also in the next video, he's going to talk about the importance of the return of the sacred objects in relation to the recovery of the ancestral territory.
Creo que la devolución de objetos, ya mire ejemplo que ya está. la máscara. La máscara, ¿cómo fue? Pues eso era de baile y eso, pues fue por allá, pues los de evolución devolvieron y ya están en arriba, en uso, ya, pues están en usos. Entonces, pues yo creo que así mismo creemos el objeto que están en los loros de museos, pues a devolverlos donde estaban, para que siga funcionando lo que ellos hacen sus funciones. Entonces, pues creo que esa es la razón. Y su pregunta, pues cada pregunta en la lengua nuestra es como, no es una baldosa, sino que es una integral. ¿Sí? Por eso mismo yo le cuento eso y usted verá, lo recorta. ¿Sí? Entonces, primero, línea negra esa es la representación de la de origen, que es físico, que está Sechilla, ¿sí? Territorio de paz. O sea, territorio de paz, Sechilla es buscar, es vivir de la paz, ¿sí? Y dentro de eso existe, ha habido elementos de eso, y ese elemento se han desaparecido, o lo llevaron, o lo robaron, o la vendieron, pues ahora estamos buscando sobre la reparación del territorio ancestral o espiritual, material, cuando decimos, pues todo está, sea en Colombia, de Oro Museo, o sea en otro país, pues creo que vamos a seguir gestionando.
Let us now move on to the second part, in which I would like to talk briefly about the life of the sacred object in the museums. And here you can see an excerpt from our research on the Sierra Nevadas cultural heritage, most of which is currently scattered in collections and museums all over the world. And as objects, sacred objects were taken away from their place of origin and translocated to museums, they also underwent a change of meaning, entering a context of new languages and descriptions, new practices and categorizations, and therefore receiving new functions. Firstly, they became objects. More specifically, they became objects of contemplation, objects of art, ethnographic objects, archaeological objects, toxic objects, but they also became, for example, economic resources, testimonies of foreign and ancient cultures, forgotten things, inanimate things, lifeless things, etc. In short, sacred objects in museums are immersed in practices that can be attributed to a modern epistemology. They are based on principles such as the dualistic separation of spheres, such as subject, object, nature, culture, material, immaterial, also the linear perception of time, but also the focus on the individual and possession or ownership. So we have heard, let's say, two opposing perspectives on cultural heritage, and now we would like to conclude with a final reflection. This image shows the same Mamuteku who's dancing on the left side in a closed environment and on the right side in connection with the sun. Current museum practices place the object in a state in which not only it cannot fulfill its original function, but it is also frozen in time and space. It is immobile, disconnected and isolated from the world outside of the museum, reduced to certain technical, material, aesthetic, cultural, or typological characteristics. Based on the concept of the interconnection between all existing things, indigenous people apply management and practices that reactivate objects, or rather entities, as instruments so that they can fulfill. From this we can deduce the recognition of alternative epistemological systems allow the reconfiguration of museological practices. Likewise, ancestral knowledge can promote the awareness of relationality with all that exists. A notion that the modern world has lost due to the alienation produced by modern processes of production. This leading to the separation from the earth, which is why such wisdom and knowledge or skills about the care of Mother Earth have been lost. A perspective that puts skills which can recover planet's equilibrium at the center, potentially incentivizing a process in which cultures and governments of the world could come together and act collectively to address the climate crisis. At this point, would you like to add something, Peter?
Okay. I think I will explain a little bit more about what Arregoses was saying in his intervention, because it looks like the translation on the subtitles was a little bit inaccurate. He was saying that ancestral territory of the four people of the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta is marked out by this black line, and that a lot of the black line goes along the coast. That black line is sort of the defense for ancestral territory. It has a whole number of sacred sites in it. And each one of those sacred sites has a function of protecting territory. So it has a function of not letting disease coming in, not letting invasions coming in. And each one of those sacred sites is associated with a number of these objects that we now find in museums. So, for instance, the dancing object, I think that Laura just showed on the slide of the dancing figure, that is this dancing Tairona person who is dancing to keep up these principles of nature together so that the Sierra Nevada will be protected. So each one of these sacred sites has its objects in it that help to protect the ancestral territory. So there's a relationship between objects and territory that are all together. And in the 19th century, 20th century, they were basically looted. All these objects were looted. And this, for the indigenous people, leaves a lot of the territory without its spiritual protection. These objects were worked through spiritually as spiritual offerings to territory, and now they've been taken away. So the idea is that it's a sort of a post-colonial recontextualization of relationships with indigenous people, and is also a recontextualization of the importance of these objects that I think that many times, what Laura was saying, modern societies can forget these kinds of relationships that people used to live, and we still do live, of course, with our spirit and land. But it was also a way of life and a way of relationship with territory and nature that the indigenous people here still use, still are based on that. And the importance of having these objects returned to recognize the ways that we live together with territory. So that's what part of this presentation is about. And Laura's doing some very important work on making the inventory of all the objects that have found their way to European museums, so that we can then recontextualize the work, recontextualize why they're there. A lot of times in archaeology, there is a disconnect between present day people and past day people. And so it's very easy to say, oh, today's indigenous people are not related to the archaeological past. And that would be another discursive technique to justify the reason why these objects are in the museums today, when in fact the indigenous people of today still use the same objects that are in the museums, are still used today for all the spiritual work that goes on. And so that's it's a way to recontextualize our relationship with the past as well. I think I'll say that for the moment. And so we're very happy. I think it's important that we're being able to present this, do this presentation, this article today as a message to the museums. And we are seeing that many museums are actually quite interested in recognizing this relationship that takes place between the collections in the museums and then the way that they're actually used in the way that these objects are still used in many local communities.